Good afternoon, everybody. How are we? Everybody doing well? Good. So again, my name is Chris Jorgensen. I'm with IPC. We're a technical and technology trade association. We've been in existence. There we go. One more. Oh, that's small. We've been in existence since 1957 as a standards developing organization. That's how we started. So standards for printed circuit boards and printed circuit board assemblies. So if you open up your iPhone, you look inside there, you see that green card with all the little doohickeys on it. They're called components. We develop, or we have committees that develop standards for those devices. We do training and education around standards. We also do certification. We have a worldwide presence with our standards use. We translate all of our standards for any market in just about any country, and also provide training there. This is really small. Okay. So we have more than 300 standards in our library. Again, these have all been developed by groups of peers who come together, and these would even be competitors working together to develop standards, with the idea that by having standards in place, there's a baseline understanding for an industry to have some expectations to meet. There's a way for a user or I would say a brand or a tier one to understand what are the materials that are available and what are the data sets around those materials based on similar testing requirements. Is there any way we can make these big? When I submitted this, I did the right format. Sorry. So while he's doing that, as I stated, so all of the standards that we have, none of them are developed by a staff person or one or two people. These are all developed by committees of volunteers with companies from across the electronic supply chain. Yeah, thanks very much. And they do so because they want to have a way to influence standards that are going to be in the marketplace, standards that they're going to have to meet. I mean, eventually somebody's going to come to them for some sort of a contract and say, I want you to meet the requirements of this IPC standard or that IPC standard. But there's also some other reasons why companies participate. First, I mean, there's no cost or obligation. IPC doesn't charge a company or a content contributor to participate on a committee. For anybody who's participated, say, on IEC, you know that's the exact opposite. You have to pay dues to have a seat at the table. When we publish a document, this is really good added marketing for a company. Every participant that was involved in the development of that standard gets listed in the front. So when one of your customers picks up that standard and looks through it and sees your company, they're going to know that you were involved in some way, shape, or form with the development of that standard. So it's good marketing for you. There's no roadblocks to submit comments. IPC has a very strong policy of openness and fairness with our standards development. We meet ANSI's requirements, and also we have to make sure that we are not violating antitrust. That means that any comment from any person on any document, draft or published, has to be responded to. So you're not just going to have a comment that you're going to submit that's going to go into a file basket somewhere, or you're going to be told you can't submit it because you haven't paid dues. Every comment that comes in, we need to respond to. It doesn't mean it's going to shape the standard or that it's going to be accepted, but at least you're going to get a response. The timeline to develop a standard is 1 to 3 years. I mean, all counting on the amount of content that we have to start with and how active the committee is, it can be, like I said, anywhere from 1 year to 3 years. We have a standard that I'll be discussing in a second that we put on a 3-year cycle, and we've kept it on that path. So there's an opportunity to network and to get free education. So I have dozens and dozens of participants on my standards committees. Some are the actual participants who are really doing the work, submitting the comments. Others are listening in, and that's fine, because when the standard's published, they're going to have an idea of what did the committee mean by this requirement or referencing this test method, or why did they include this section in the document. So about 2 years ago, the e-textile space approached IPC. IPC, we have a committee where we actually have 30 general committees that follow similar committee structures to what you see here. But I'm a liaison for the Printed Electronics Committee. So these are the companies that are printing conductive or functional materials onto some sort of a substrate. And they told me, we're being asked to print on stretchable materials and fabrics. What kind of standards are there? I just did some asking around. I went to different industry groups that I knew were on the textile space, and we found there really wasn't a lot in the way of standards. So that industry came to IPC and said, we want to have a committee within IPC. We feel that this would be a good fit for the kind of standards we want to develop, because they're not just textile standard. We're putting in electronics and we're adding electrical functionality. So there's going to be a lot of crossover between or at least it fits within the scope of IPC's work, and it's something that we can use as far as there's a template in place with a committee structure and a standards process. And so last year we started off with just one subcommittee, and the subcommittee is where the work is being done. And right now we're up to 3, and we just launched earlier this year a European committee. The European committee is just helping to influence standards development in Europe by helping us to, they come together and they talk about what their standards needs are, and then we help them to form a task group or a different subcommittee to actually work on a topic. Here we go again. So I know you can't read that. I'm going to have to get up closer so I can read it too. So we also have families of standards. What that just means is that we have general topic areas. So that way, if somebody comes to the IPC committee and says, I need a standard for reliability for textiles for medical applications, we'll have a place to put it as far as the designations, and so we can keep things kind of grouped together. But this was a topic area or a list of topic areas that we came up with between the general committee chair and myself. And we left even space open for 3 other family or standards families, but if you could see that, we have actually room for up to 90 standards. Doesn't mean we're going to do 90 standards right away, but we wanted to show the e-textiles community that, IPC is pretty serious about what we're doing here. Is there a way to fix these? I don't understand. Okay, so so one standard that we started, this was 2 years ago when the committee was launched, is a standard for testing requirements for e-textiles. And when the subcommittee first formed, they looked at embroidered, stitched, knitted, woven, non-woven, printed, pretty much everything under the sun, what you would have for an electrical or electronically integrated textile at the fabric level before assembly. And what we found as we were moving along was that we're just casting with way too wide a net. So the title's a little bit small there, but we focused in on woven and knitted e-textiles. That's what the committee decided on, because that's where there's the most crossover and most commonality as far as the requirements or the testing that needs to be done. So in this standard, it's going to cover and also not cover quite a few things. So we're going to establish, or the committee is establishing, classifications for materials. So it's a way for users and suppliers of woven and knitted e-textiles to have some common sort of definitions or understandings of what is going into the construction of that product. We're also going to set terms and definitions. Now, terms and definitions only if they're specific to what's in the document and they're not already covered in ASTM, because of the ASTM terms and definitions document, we want to reference back to that. We don't want to have dueling terms and definitions out there. There's going to be key characteristics and durability requirements. So that's the basis for the standard, is to have, here are the key characteristics that you need to test for, and these are the durability requirements, which you can almost consider to be special requirements based on the end use need. And we're also going to have quality assurance testing frequencies. So that means it would, according to the standard, it will say how often you should test, so that way you're not repeating the same test over and over for each time that you place an order. That reduces the amount of time it takes to get product to market, reduces costs on the manufacturer. A manufacturer can spend more time on innovation. So we're looking at splitting it out into every 6 months, once a year, or annual lot basis or one-time characterization. It's important to note that we're not going to cover requirements for the non-electrically integrated textiles. There's already standards out there for textiles. We're not going to touch on those because that's beyond the scope of what we're doing. And we're not going to cover the other types of e-textiles that I mentioned earlier on. But at least with the development of the standard, with the amount of work that's been put into it, if another group comes up and says, we want to do one for embroidered, we can say, here, we have the starting point content. All you need to do is flesh through this, take out the stuff that doesn't matter to you, and add the things that do. So here is an example of some of the key performance characteristics that are going to be in 8921. So these are things from an electrical or an electronic standpoint you're probably pretty familiar with, but these are all the different characteristics that the committee decided upon. And then where they could point to industry test methods. It's important that we're not just sending people off and saying you can do a test between the user and the supplier. We give that out, but we do reference at least one, sometimes two test methods for each one of the requirements. The idea behind this, and this is what we did with the printed electronics team as well, is that because there aren't test methods that are specific to this audience or specific to these products right now, you have to keep it kind of open. You don't want to limit everybody to doing just one test. But on the next revision, we're probably going to trim the test methods down so that way it's just one test per requirement. It tops two, but the reason why you want to have it only one and no more than two is because as a buyer of materials, you want to be able to go out to your suppliers and say, what is your data on IPC 8921? What is your specific heat capacity for running, when you run the test? And if they're running different tests, they're going to get different results, or there's a possibility that they're going to get different results. This document also includes a lot of different durability tests. And the durability tests, these are listed out in a way that you're not required, or as a manufacturer, you're not required or expected to conduct all the tests, because all the tests may not be necessary based on the customer's use of the end product for that particular e-textile. But for instance, like for laundering and dry cleaning, that's probably not going to be of interest to the upholstery side of things, or I'm sorry, but like to NASA. But things like microbes might. So with each one of these, there's going to be an industry test that we call out that would be basically one of the traditional sort of textile tests, but you're going to do an electrical resistance test before and after. So next steps for this document. So this document right now is under working draft review and comment. We have comments in. The group is reviewing comments and is preparing the document for what we call final draft for industry review. This is a final 30-day call for comments before we ballot for publication. So this group, when it first formed a year and a half or 2 years ago, had set the end of this year to publish this document, and they're on track to do that. So while the e-textiles materials group is working, IPC received a lot of interest and calls for information about connectors for e-textiles. We've been told that this is one of the things that is really kind of a roadblock for mass production because there's so many different customized textile connectors. And so we have a group right now that's just started, and they're developing a guideline for connectors for e-textiles. And I know this is small. I have to get there again. But basically what they've done is they're breaking out this document into the interface type. So you're going to have electrical and mechanical interfaces. And if you're going to have, based on these interfaces, what are the tests that you're going to do? What are the products where this works for? What's the different connectors, the actual hardware connectors that are available to you? What kind of a protective element are you going to have to put onto the connector? So again, this is a document or an activity that's just getting started, and we're looking forward to seeing where this goes. The original table of contents that was developed by the volunteer team was something like 15 to 20 pages long, so that one was pretty frightening for me as staff. So as these other groups are developing their standards, we also have a group that it has popped up to look at test methods. As I mentioned with IPC 8921, we have the test methods in there that the committee has selected. As other groups come to IPC with the needs for developing standards, and as we go into revision of IPC 8921, we need to have a group that's going to validate test methods. So let us know, the test method that's in these standards, is this the right one? Are we referencing it correctly? Do we have to put a caveat statement? Because maybe there's a part of one step in that test method itself that would be detrimental to the material that's being tested. So we have the test method validation and development subcommittee, and they're beginning work in this. They've already started a test method gap analysis. So they're looking at even beyond just what's in our standards right now, understanding what are the different requirements or characteristics that you need to be concerned about from any level of production for e-textiles or smart textiles. What are the tests that are in existence that we know of? What are the tests that have to be developed? So this group is just getting started again. One of the other things that we're going to task them with is authoring white papers. The standards development process, 1 to 3 years from a standards perspective, is pretty darn good. From an end market waiting for information, that's slow. So as we're moving along, the committee is also soliciting ideas and topics for white papers. So in the last 6-7 months or so, we've published the first 2 white papers for the e-textiles committee. We have a washability one that was done out of a testing laboratory in France. And then we have one about the e-textiles framework or stack, which was written by Maddie Maxwell. Maddie is going to be, Maddie Maxey, who is going to be one of our presenters later this afternoon. So both of these are available in the IPC store. We are looking for other, if you're academia, if you're a testing laboratory, if you're a manufacturer, if you have information that you want to share that you can put into a white paper, you're okay with it being peer reviewed, then we can get it, it's something that we can really quickly get published. Typically the turnaround time for this is like 3 to 6 months. So some new developments, and again this is small. So we have, and I found this interesting on the first afternoon presentation, is that 3 of the major markets looking forward are health, wellness, and then, industrial safety. And we actually have groups right now that are coming together to develop e-textile standards for e-textiles for use in sports market, for health and wellness, and also for personal protective equipment, which I think kind of blends over into safety, but that personal protective is mostly looking at equipment used by firefighters. What we're asking these groups to look at as they're developing these standards and talking about them is think about baseline requirements across the board. Because we could have individual standards for each one of these product types or markets, but if we can find commonality or common ground across the different platforms, from a manufacturing standpoint, it's going to make life easier. It's going to help things to grow quicker, because rather than having individual standards that you're going to have to meet as a manufacturer, you'd have to meet as a designer for each one of these product types. You'd have a baseline, and then you could have some special requirements for each one of those different product types. We also have a group that's forming to look at printed, now coming back where we first started, for printed electronics on e-textiles. So that's something where what we did is we had a group come up with some standard nomenclatures or types of printed electronics for e-textiles. If you're printing directly on a textile, not as well done. If you're printing on a release sheet that is heat transferred, if you're printing on a laminated piece, or you're printing and laminating over it. So we have those types set up. So kind of like when I showed the different categories for standards that we have right now, we have a similar sort of thing for printed electronics. So basically, how would the IPC textile standards help propel the industry? So they're developing multiple markets. So you're going to have multiple market influence in the standards. You're going to have a lot of different perspective on things, and especially from the material standpoint, by having all the understanding of the materials that are out there is going to be helpful. I know that even from the U.S. Department of Defense, they're running into some issues right now because they need to have an industrial supply base, a domestic industrial supply base, and they really don't have a good way right now of determining what are the material sets, what are the data that backs this up, who are the manufacturers, who's qualified. And so we actually have U.S. Army as the co-chair now of our general committee. By having standards, you reduce costs and time to market, because rather than spending a lot of time in the lab testing your materials over and over again, you can have the qualification and characterization testing that you can do according to the standard. IPC standards are developed for every step in the process. So from the materials where we are right now to the final product where we're looking at for the wearable products for health and wellness and PPE. And also, IPC standards are recognized worldwide. I mean, if you go into pretty much any electronics manufacturer worldwide, they will know the IPC logo. Most of them will, I would say most, many of them will have the IPC logo in their facility because they've been certified either within their facility or their employees have been certified. So, how to get involved? Well, I don't want you to get involved. That's why the text is so small. So, how to get involved? Basically, contact me. Like I said, there's no cost or obligation for you to be on the standards. And we do want everybody to be involved. You can participate in a committee just by listening in on a phone call. Most of our meetings are on the web. We do 1-hour web meetings every once in a while. We'll do some working meetings when we can. But really, your participation and your involvement is up to you. At the very least, request these documents for comment. If you're not the person within your company who should be commenting on it, pass it along to somebody who does. The only way that we can have a quality standard that's put out is with the input from as many people as possible. We actually, with the committee that is developing 8921, pretty happy with that. The comments that we got back when we sent it out, because it was sent to 140 people for the first time, really wasn't a lot. You know, but the comments that we got were all really, really good comments, because these are things that when you have a small group of people trying to just flesh together a working draft, they don't think about everything. If you have an internal standard or test that you use and you want to get it out to industry, consider submitting it as a starting point for a standard. A lot of our standards start off that way. They start off with an internal standard. It's happening a lot. I'm seeing right now, or at least we're starting to see with Japan, because the Japanese market, those companies they call it standards obesity. They have so many internal standards that they're finding that it's really hard to manage. But rather than having all these internal standards, have one standard that's an industry that you can point to, and then you can add your other requirements on top of it. I'm out of range. So this is an example of the 150 companies and organizations that are on our committee right now. So a lot of names and logos that you'd recognize, and hope that by this time next year we'll see yours up there. But again, this is an opportunity for anybody with any company to participate however they want, and that's the way our standards activities work. So finally, September 10th and 11th this year, IPC will be at Drexel University Center for Functional Fabrics. This will be our 2-day conference and standards meeting. So we're going to have a standards meeting or session that'll take place. We'll do tours of the new Drexel facility. We'll have technical presentations, opportunities to network and collaborate. So it's going to be another fun, active event. Hope to see many of you there. It's a good opportunity for a first jump in the water with IPC and with our committee work. So sorry about the technical glitches with the slides, but thanks for your time.